It means there's added impetus to ensure Prince William is match fit for a possible call-up to the top job. So how will the 42-year-old wear the crown? Is he really ready?
A single administrative order just stripped Queen Camilla's sister of her lifelong royal privileges. Prince William signed the decree in total secrecy, blindsiding his father and breaking centuries of palace protocol with a single stroke of a pen. No warning was given, and no explanations were offered to the family. What did the Prince of Wales discover in the estate archives that forced him to launch this sudden, brutal crackdown? And how far is he willing to go to purge the inner circle? The paper trail that Camilla never expected to surface. A private courier left a heavy leather binder on the desk in the Duchy of Cornwall office. It arrived without a formal press announcement. Inside lay 30 pages of line item expenses spanning 2 decades. The documents tracked every pound spent on interior design services across the royal properties. For years, these ledgers passed through the accounts with a simple nod of approval. Then came the routine financial review. A new team of forensic accountants looked at the names on the checks. One name appeared consistently on invoices for the renovation of Highgrove House and various Welsh properties. It was Annabel Elliot, Queen Camilla's younger sister. She had served as the chief interior designer for the estate for 20 years. King Charles had hired her long before his accession to the throne. The audit teams flagged the arrangement during a standard compliance check. They did not find missing money or illegal offshore accounts. They found something much harder to justify to the modern public. The contracts had been awarded without a competitive bidding process. Year after year, the estate simply renewed the agreement. The payments kept moving from the royal accounts into a private family design firm. Prince William received the final summary on a Thursday afternoon. He did not call a family meeting. He did not send a polite warning to Clarence House. Instead, he marked the file with a red pen. The Prince of Wales had spent months preparing to streamline the duchy operations. He wanted to remove any perception of favoritism from the family business. The documents showed that the design fees totaled hundreds of thousands of pounds over the years. Annabel Elliot had done extensive work. Her talent was never the issue. The issue was the lack of transparency in how the Crown chose its contractors. The new management team wanted clean ledgers before the next public reporting cycle. A senior aide called the design firm. The message was brief. The current contracts would terminate at the end of the quarter. No new projects would be assigned. The decision was presented as a standard administrative restructuring, but everyone in the palace knew the real implications. A multi-decade pipeline of family patronage had just been cut off by the heir to the throne. Queen Camilla learned about the decision through her staff, not from William. The ledger on the desk became a symbol of a deeper institutional shift. The old way of doing business, in which family members handled private royal matters behind closed doors, was coming to an end. The paper trail had been pulled into the light, and the financial protection usually granted to the inner circle was gone. The cancellation of the design contracts was only the first step. The accountants also started reviewing the guest logs and staff allocations for the estate properties. They wanted to know exactly who was using Crown resources and why. Another document emerged from the pile, dated several years prior. It contained a specific clause regarding the residential rights of extended family members on duchy land. William looked at the clause and realized the financial freeze could go much deeper. If the rules were applied strictly, more than just design fees would have to stop. The entire arrangement regarding how the Queen's family interacted with the royal estates was under threat. The paperwork was no longer just a set of receipts. It had become a blueprint for a complete restructuring of power behind the palace gates. The forensic team expanded its search beyond the immediate design invoices. They began cross-referencing supplier lists for independent contractors who had worked on the duchy's holiday cottages in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. For 20 years, these properties underwent regular aesthetic updates to maintain their luxury status for high-paying tourists. The ledger revealed that secondary contracts for fabrics, antiques, and high-end furnishings had frequently been routed through businesses with direct ties to the wider Parker Bowles and Elliott family trees. The system operated on a foundational assumption of loyalty and discretion. Under the previous administration, utilizing trusted family connections was viewed as a way to ensure security and maintain a specific standard of taste without risking public leaks. King Charles valued his sister-in-law's aesthetic eye and trusted her completely to manage the visual identity of his personal sanctuaries. The invoices were paid directly from the estate's surplus revenues, which historically were managed at the personal discretion of the Duke. When William inherited the title and the vast agricultural and commercial portfolio that came with it, he inherited absolute executive authority over these funds. The Duchy of Cornwall operates as a private estate, but its financial health is subject to intense public scrutiny and annual parliamentary reporting. The new management team appointed by the Prince of Wales brought an entirely different corporate philosophy to the office. They viewed the existing arrangement not as a harmless family tradition, but as a significant compliance liability that could damage the reputation of the future monarchy. The review team itemized every payment made since 2006. They noted that, while the quality of the work delivered was exceptional, the administrative framework behind the appointments was completely out of step with modern corporate governance. There were no records of alternative quotes being sought from competing design firms in London or the Southwest. The lack of open competition meant the estate could not definitively prove to auditors that it was receiving the maximum possible value for its expenditure. William's signature on the termination order was not just an administrative correction. It was an intentional break from his father's style of management. King Charles had always preferred a courtly arrangement, surrounding himself with a trusted circle of lifelong friends and relatives who managed his affairs with quiet familiarity. William's approach was visibly colder and defined by institutional utility. The Prince of Wales believed that the survival of the crown required a transparent separation between state-funded operations and the private commercial interests of extended family members. The fallout from the audit did not stop with the cancellation of the primary design contracts. The accountants began questioning the reimbursement of travel expenses and overnight accommodation fees associated with the design projects. For years, these auxiliary costs had been absorbed by the estate's general maintenance fund without detailed justification. When the new administration demanded retroactive receipts and specific project logs for these smaller transactions, the relationship between the Duchy office and the Queen's family deteriorated rapidly. The tension within the palace grew as the implications of the file became clear to the wider household. This was not a minor dispute over a single contract. It was a fundamental disagreement over who controlled the access points to royal patronage. By using the formal audit to dismantle the arrangement, William effectively neutralized any personal or emotional appeals that could be made to his father. The data in the report was clear, objective, and impossible to argue against without defending nepotism in a public forum. As the final pages of the financial report were filed away, a separate inquiry was launched into the usage patterns of its private vehicles and staff members assigned to the Duchy's London headquarters. The investigators wanted to ensure that no Crown-funded assets were being utilized to support the private business activities of the design firm. Every link, no matter how small or historic, was being systematically identified and evaluated under the new strict criteria established by the heir to the throne. The document remained on William's desk as a reminder of the work that still needed to be done across the broader royal infrastructure. The Prince of Wales had established a clear precedent. Past service and family proximity would no longer guarantee a place on the royal balance sheet. The paper trail had exposed a vulnerability in the family's management of its private finances, and William used it to assert his authority over the estate, setting up a direct confrontation with the household's existing hierarchy. A calculated erasure of the Windsor guest list. A security officer at the Windsor Castle Gatehouse updated the digital registry on a Monday morning. He deleted several active entry profiles from the main computer database. The physical badges tied to those accounts were deactivated immediately. From that moment, any attempt to use those cards at the outer perimeter would trigger an automatic alert in the central guard room. This change followed an explicit instruction issued by the Prince of Wales's office. The order focused directly on extended family members who did not hold official royal titles or public duties. Annabel Elliott's name was at the top of that list. For years, she enjoyed unrestricted access to the private residential quarters of Windsor Castle. She frequently visited her sister without undergoing standard visitor screening or booking her visits in advance. The new policy required all non-working relatives to submit formal requests, before entering the private sovereign grounds. They had to list the specific purpose of their visit, their expected arrival time, and the exact vehicle registration number. The security staff no longer had the authority to waive these rules for the Queen's personal guests. Every entry had to match a pre-approved digital clearance file. This shift altered the daily routine inside the palace walls. Annabelle Elliot had historically used a specific side entrance near the state apartments to bring fabrics and antique furniture samples directly into the private wings. That entrance was locked to her private vehicle. Security teams rerouted all commercial deliveries through the central distribution hub at the home park paddock, a mile away from the main residence. The physical exclusion sent an immediate message through the household staff. A senior courtier noted that the traditional courtesy passes, which allowed family members to move freely between Windsor castles and the private estate cottages, were no longer valid. The Prince of Wales was systematically separating the public institution from the private family network. The restriction was not limited to the gatehouses. Security personnel received a directive regarding the allocation of royal protection officers. Extended family members could no longer utilize estate security personnel for private errands or personal transport between properties. If a relative needed an escort on the grounds, they had to arrange it through a separate, privately funded security firm. Queen Camilla discovered the change when a scheduled delivery from her sister's firm was stopped at the outer gate. The delivery van lacked the newly required transit permit. The guards kept the vehicle at the perimeter until an official clearance could be produced by the Lord Chamberlain's office. The process took over 2 hours. The incident confirmed that the administrative changes were fully active. The old system depended heavily on verbal agreements and mutual understandings between the senior royals and the security directors. By formalizing every single access point, William removed the human element from the equation. The guards simply followed the protocol displayed on their screens. The audit of the guest list also extended to the private apartments at St. James's Palace and Kensington Palace. The review teams checked the allocation of grace and favor residences. These are properties historically granted to retired staff or extended family members at the monarch's discretion. The new guidelines required a full justification for any long-term occupancy by individuals who did not perform official public duties for the crown. The paperwork revealed that several storage facilities and workshops within the Royal Mews were being used by private entities without formal lease agreements. The new administration drafted standard commercial rental contracts for these spaces. The message was explicit. If a private business used crown property, it had to pay the full market rate to the Treasury. The enforcement of these rules created a cold atmosphere during the weekly planning meetings. Staff members who previously answered directly to the King's household now had to clear all logistical decisions with William's management team. The two households operated under different priorities, and the heirs team held the legal authority over the land and the buildings. The security logs showed a sharp drop in informal family visits within 30 days of the update. The complex paperwork acted as an effective barrier. Relatives preferred to meet outside the royal estates rather than submit to the rigorous vetting process at the gates. The inner sanctum of Windsor became increasingly quiet, reserved almost exclusively for official state business and the immediate line of succession. William's team remained firm on the policy despite the growing discomfort among the staff. They argued that the modern political climate required total transparency regarding who had access to the sovereign. A single security breach or an unauthorized photograph could damage the institution's credibility. The erasure of the guest list was presented as a defensive measure to protect the crown from future controversy. As the weeks passed, a separate question began to circulate among the palace aides. The restrictions at Windsor were highly visible, but they were tied to a larger document signed earlier in the year. The staff wondered if this policy would soon be applied to the private estates in Scotland and Norfolk, where the family traditionally gathered for the summer holidays. The answer lay in a separate set of administrative files currently sitting in the prince's private office. The Sandringham table becomes a battleground. 2 silver serving platters were placed on the sideboard in the small dining room at Sandringham. The evening staff poured wine, finished the primary table service, and withdrew to the kitchens. Only 4 people remained in the room. King Charles sat at the head of the table, with Queen Camilla directly opposite him. Prince William sat to his father's right, facing a stack of leather-bound briefing documents that he had brought from the estate office earlier that afternoon. The initial conversation centered on timber yields and tenant farming leases on the Norfolk estate. Then Camilla spoke about the delivery delays at Windsor. She asked why her sister's design firm had been forced to wait at the gatehouse for 2 hours over a missing transit permit. She noted that the delay had disrupted a pre-scheduled restoration project in the private library. William did not look up from his plate immediately. He set his fork down, adjusted his napkin, and stated that the gatehouse was simply enforcing the new standard security protocols. He explained that every vendor, regardless of past affiliation, was required to present a digital clearance token before entering the residential perimeter. The rule applied across all duchy and crown holdings without exception. Camilla countered that 30 years of personal loyalty should outweigh a newly implemented software setting. She asked the king to intervene, pointing out that the public termination of the design contracts appeared to be a deliberate, targeted insult to her family. She argued that a sovereign spouse possessed the traditional right to manage the interior arrangements of the private apartments using chosen, trusted professionals. King Charles looked at the documents between them. He did not immediately defend the old arrangement. Earlier that winter, specifically on January 12th, the king had signed a temporary devolution of estate authority while preparing for his medical treatments. He had signed the document at his desk in London, believing it was a routine delegation of administrative paperwork to ease his workload. William turned to a specific page in the folder and pushed it across the polished wood. The text showed that the king had transferred absolute executive control over the royal household's domestic budgets and contractor vetting to the heir's office for a period of 12 months. The signature at the bottom was clear. Charles had unknowingly granted his son the legal authority to override any traditional family understanding regarding the estate accounts. The room remained silent as the king read the clause he had authorized weeks prior. He realized that his son had leveraged the legal text to completely isolate the household from personal financial appeals. William stated that the decision had already been executed. The Treasury had already processed the contract terminations, and the public disclosure logs were updated for the upcoming parliamentary session. Camilla shifted the argument from finance to institutional precedent. She reminded William that previous monarchs had always protected the private commercial interests of their extended families to avoid public scandal. She suggested that a sudden, aggressive purge of long-standing contractors would invite intense media speculation about an internal family feud. William rejected the suggestion. He stated that the media would find far more interest in an unvetted, non-competitive contract awarded to a direct relative of the Queen. He argued that the institution's modern survival depended entirely on absolute transparency. The family could no longer afford to treat crown assets as a private employment agency for their inner circle. The king did not rescind the delegation of authority. He acknowledged that the legal framework established in January could not be easily altered without creating a significant administrative crisis between their respective offices. He instructed both parties to ensure that any future adjustments to the estate staff were handled quietly, through formal channels rather than during private family gatherings. The confrontation left the existing hierarchy fundamentally altered. Camilla realized that the verbal agreements that had governed the household for 2 decades were completely invalid under the new corporate regime. William's management team held the keys to the ledger and used the king's own signature to enforce the changes. As the dinner ended, William packed the documents back into the leather folder. He had successfully maintained the freeze at Windsor and Sandringham, but the larger challenge remained. The audit team had just uncovered a separate set of financial transactions linking the private royal accounts directly to properties held by the Queen's family in Wiltshire. The struggle for control over the royal fortune was moving beyond simple design contracts and gatehouse passes, where the royal money actually stopped moving. A bank transfer from the Duchy of Cornwall's central account failed to clear on a Tuesday morning. The automated system flagged the transaction, routing it into a hold queue for manual authorization. The payment was intended for a secondary logistics company based in Wiltshire. That company handled the transport of valuable antiques between private royal residences and independent auction houses. The compliance officers looked at the company's registration files. The board of directors included names closely linked to the Queen's immediate family. For 15 years, this specific transport firm had enjoyed an exclusive arrangement with the estate. They moved art, furniture, and personal archives without competing against standard commercial shipping rates. William's new administrative director refused to sign the manual release form. Instead, he locked the funds in the treasury account. The prince had issued a directive stating that any company failing to provide a 3-year competitive pricing history would face an immediate operational freeze. The Wiltshire firm could not produce those documents because they had never been asked to compete for the work. The freeze caused an immediate logistical backup. A shipment of 18th century paintings destined for an exhibition in London remained sitting in a secure holding facility on the Highgrove estate. The king's personal aides tried to bypass the treasury block by requesting funds from the privy purse. The privy purse is the monarch's private income, separate from the taxpayer-funded sovereign grant. The review teams anticipated this move. They produced a ledger showing that the privy purse itself relied on surplus revenues generated by specific land holdings in the southwest. Under the January agreement, those land holdings are currently managed by William's team. The financial pipelines were completely intertwined, and William had placed a digital checkpoint at every single junction. King Charles called his chief financial advisor to his study to find a solution. The king wanted to fulfill his personal obligations to the transport firm without creating a public controversy. The advisor revealed that paying the invoices through an alternative private account would still require an entry in the annual combined royal tax returns. If the payments fell outside the standard duchy framework, it would appear to be a covert attempt to fund relatives. The tension shifted from a corporate dispute to a deep financial standoff. The Queen's inner circle found themselves locked out of contracts that had sustained their businesses for a generation. The pipeline had stopped moving money, and the financial isolation was complete. William's team offered a single path forward. The Wiltshire firm could reapply for the work, but it would have to compete in a public tender alongside standard commercial logistics giants. The company declined to enter the public bidding process. To do so would require opening their private financial books to parliamentary investigators. They chose to let the existing agreements expire completely. By the end of the month, the regular transfers into the Wiltshire accounts ceased entirely. A corporate transport firm with no family ties took over the routes the following Monday. The resolution of the transport dispute brought an even larger financial reality to light. The forensic accountants discovered that a significant portion of the estate's charitable donations had been routed to preservation trusts, in which the Queen's relatives held honorary seats. These trusts managed historical buildings and landscape gardens that frequently bordered private Parker Bowles properties. William's team began drafting a new set of philanthropic guidelines for the duchy. The draft stated that no charitable funds could be allocated to entities where an extended family member held a fiduciary or advisory role. This move threatened to dismantle several local heritage projects that the king had personally championed for decades. The king realized that his son was not just auditing invoices, he was systematically rewriting the family's economic map. The old network of mutual benefits, local favors, and quiet arrangements was being dismantled line by line. The money was kept in the institutional vault, locked behind strict compliance codes that ignored personal relationships entirely. The staff at the Treasury office noticed the change in daily operations. The atmosphere became intensely formal. Invoices that used to be settled with a verbal confirmation now sat in review queues for weeks. The power dynamic had permanently shifted. The heir's office held the ultimate financial leverage, and they were using it to cut the remaining threads connecting the Queen's family to the royal fortune. The new guard rewrites the unwritten rules. A fresh stack of blue-bound folders was distributed to every senior department head at Buckingham Palace on a Friday afternoon. The documents bore the stamp of the Prince of Wales's private office. These papers outlined the operational rules for the next decade. The text did not contain suggestions. It contained a list of binding mandates that permanently changed how the royal households would handle private contracts, family accommodations, and estate access. The new protocol dissolved the traditional boundary between the king's personal staff and the duchy management team. Under the old system, the monarch's household operated on precedent, relying on unwritten rules passed down through generations of courtiers. William's team replaced those traditions with a standardized corporate handbook. Every purchase order exceeding £10,000 now requires direct clearance from a central compliance committee. This change represented a direct victory for the new guard. For months, courtiers debated whether William had the legal right to enforce such a sweeping lockdown on the Queen's family. The answer emerged from a separate file discovered in the Windsor archives, dated October 12, 2021. It was a private memorandum written by the late Queen Elizabeth during her final multi-year review of estate sustainability. The memorandum contained an explicit directive regarding the modernization of the Crown's financial structures. Queen Elizabeth had noted that the survival of the monarchy required a complete separation between state-supported assets and the private commercial ventures of extended relatives. She had explicitly authorized the heir to the throne to serve as the primary executor of this modernization plan upon the transition of power. William used this document as his ultimate authority. When the king's advisors attempted to challenge the contract cancellations, William produced his grandmother's signed memorandum. The legal text gave him the moral and institutional cover to ignore family complaints. He wasn't breaking protocol. He was executing a long-delayed mandate from the long-reigning monarch. The impact of the new handbook spread across the entire royal infrastructure. The purchasing teams at Sandringham, Balmoral, and Highgrove began canceling local arrangements that had existed for decades. Independent suppliers who had provided goods to the family based on personal handshakes were told to register on a public procurement portal. The old court system, built on personal favors and family proximity, was completely dismantled within a matter of weeks. The Queen's inner circle felt the change immediately. The social calendar at the estates underwent an administrative audit. Invitations to private shooting parties and weekend gatherings on the royal lands were now cross-referenced with the new security whitelist. Relatives who used to treat the estates as private holiday resorts found themselves receiving formal, polite rejections from the gatehouse managers. The king accepted the permanent shift in administrative power. He recognized that the corporate model his son introduced was the only way to shield the institution from public criticism over expenses. The old way of doing business was too risky in the modern media landscape. Charles chose to focus his remaining energy on his constitutional duties, leaving the day-to-day management of the family fortune entirely in William's hands. The tension within the palace walls gradually settled into a cold corporate reality. The staff stopped appealing to the king's office for exceptions to the rules. They knew the computer systems would reject any transaction that didn't comply with the blue-bound folders. The Prince of Wales had successfully insulated the treasury from personal influence, setting a strict precedent for his own future reign. As the corporate transition neared completion, a new set of data logs arrived at the Central Archive. The audit teams had finished their review of the residential tenancies on the Crown estates in Scotland. The paperwork showed that several historic cottages near Balmoral were currently leased to friends of the older generation at nominal fees. The new guard turned their attention to these documents, preparing for the next phase of the restructuring plan, the Balmoral balances and the final boundary. A moving van with unmarked side panels stopped near a stone cottage on the edge of the Balmoral estate. Two workers began loading wooden crates containing antique fishing gear and heavy wool rugs into the back. A local estate ranger watched the process from his vehicle, checking a digital inventory list on a tablet. The cottage had been occupied during the summer months by extended connections of the Queen's family for over 15 years. The tenancy records for the property had been fully reviewed by the Edinburgh Land Management Team. The lease agreement, established in 2011, showed a rental fee far below the standard commercial rate for the Aberdeenshire region. The previous administration had classified the arrangement as a private grace and favor agreement. The new guidelines required all residential units on Crown land to generate market value returns to fund local conservation efforts. The occupants received a formal letter from the land agents in early spring. The text offered two distinct choices. They could match the newly assessed commercial rent value or vacate the property before the start of the summer tourist season. The family chose to leave. They did not want their private vacation costs debated in a public audit report. This eviction marked the completion of the estate restructuring plan across the northern properties. William's management team had successfully applied the new corporate guidelines to every single acreage under their control. The old boundaries between personal family favors and public property management were permanently erased. The estate cottages were listed on a premium holiday rental website the following week, open to any member of the public willing to pay the premium tariff. The revenue from these new rentals went directly into a ring-fenced account designated for environmental repairs on the estate. William wanted a clear record of where every single pound went. The public could see that the money wasn't funding a royal lifestyle, but rather repairing paths and planting native trees. This data provided the ultimate defense against critics of royal wealth. Queen Camilla did not fight the Balmoral changes. Her sister's firm had already transitioned to purely private clients in the south, completely detached from the royal family's balance sheets. The family had adjusted to the new reality. They understood that access to the inner sanctum now required an official invitation, recorded in the central database, rather than a casual phone call to a palace staffer. The management team did not halt their inspection at the residential cottages. They began a comprehensive audit of the sporting lodges and fishing beats along the River Dee. Historically, these prime locations were reserved during the peak August season for personal friends of the monarch, often without any formal booking fee being recorded. Under the updated protocols, any dates not utilized directly by the King or the Prince of Wales were handed over to commercial sporting agencies to maximize revenue. The sudden shift in access caused widespread discussion among the traditional estate staff. Many of the older gamekeepers had spent decades managing the land under a system based on personal relationships and hereditary privilege. They were accustomed to preparing the rivers and glens for familiar faces who arrived each year as a matter of course. Now, they had to coordinate their schedules with corporate clients who booked the facilities through an automated online portal. The revenue reports generated from these commercial bookings were sent directly to the London Treasury Office every Friday afternoon. The data showed a significant increase in estate income within the first 60 days of the new policy. This financial success effectively neutralized any internal resistance to William's methods. The numbers proved that the lands could self-fund their own expensive maintenance costs without drawing additional resources from the public purse. King Charles spent his summer evenings in the main castle library, reviewing state papers and focusing on his upcoming overseas travel schedule. His health remained his primary priority, and he left the business of running the estates entirely to the next generation. The transition of operational power was complete, and the household had adapted to the colder, more transparent system. The changes on the ground reflected a broader preparation for the future. William had proved that he could dismantle long-standing traditions without causing a public crisis or a breakdown in family functioning. He had protected the institution by removing any trace of financial favoritism from the ledgers. The new guard had successfully rewritten the rules of the house. The administrative offices at Balmoral were completely reorganized to reflect this new corporate identity. The old paper filing systems, which contained decades of handwritten notes and informal agreements regarding estate privileges, were archived in secure vaults. They were replaced by a centralized digital management system that tracked every asset, lease, and maintenance request in real time. The security teams also integrated their databases with the land management software. This integration ensured that no visitor could access any part of the estate without an active digital permit, linked directly to a verified financial or official record. The informal weekend visits that had defined the social life of the royal family for over a century were replaced by a structured environment where every action was logged and analyzed. A final document arrived at the Buckingham Palace archive on a rainy afternoon. It was the consolidated financial summary for the fiscal year, signed by the independent auditors. For the first time in 20 years, the section covering related party transactions and family contracts was entirely blank. The paper trail was completely clean, and the new precedent was firmly established. The era of quiet family favors behind palace gates has officially come to an end. By using the late Queen's final mandates, Prince William has permanently rewired the royal economy, prioritizing institutional survival over personal relationships. It is a cold, calculated blueprint for his future reign, one that leaves no room for sentimental nepotism.